At midnight, Elder Reed watched from his window as a shadow crept toward his new steel mailbox, the one no one could destroy. A sharp clang broke the silence, then a scream. By dawn, Cedar Valley would know the truth. The mailbox had fought back, and the real war had begun. Get ready for a story that'll pull you in so deep, you won't be able to walk away. This is not just a tale, it's an experience you'll feel. So before we begin, hit subscribe to Black Battles, where every story hits harder than truth itself. The morning sun had barely touched the roofs of Cedar Valley when Elder Reed stepped outside with a mug of black coffee, and the faint hope that today might finally be quiet. The crisp air smelled of pine and fresh-cut lawns. For a moment, he believed the neighborhood could still offer the peace he had come here to find. But as soon as his eyes fell on the curb, the calm inside him shattered. His handcrafted mailbox, painted deep navy blue with polished brass numbers, lay in ruins. Splintered wood was scattered across the driveway like shrapnel. The post had been ripped out of the ground, bolts twisted and metal bent as if someone had taken deliberate pleasure in destroying it. The coffee cup slipped from Elder's hand, shattering against the pavement. He froze. Then the tremor in his jaw began. It wasn't the loss of the mailbox itself that stung. It was the pattern. 7 times in 2 months. 7 new mailboxes, each one destroyed within days. Someone wanted to send him a message, and this time he knew exactly who. Across the street stood Margaret Halton, chairperson of the Cedar Valley Homeowners Association. She was dressed, as always, like she was heading to a photo shoot. Tailored white blouse, pearl earrings, and that controlled smile that never reached her eyes. Her little white dog barked twice before she hushed it with a finger. Then she raised her hand in a polite wave that somehow felt like mockery. Elder didn't wave back. He could still remember their first conversation 3 months earlier. The year when she had stopped him in front of his house. "Mr. Reed," she had said, clipboard in hand, "your mailbox doesn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. Cedar Valley has standards." He had shown her the HOA bylaws, proof that his mailbox followed every measurement and color code. But Margaret had simply smiled and said, "Rules bend for people who belong here." That one sentence had told him everything he needed to know about her. Now, staring at the wreckage, Elder felt the old fire rise again. The same one he had buried after leaving the police force. Back then, he had learned to control anger, to think before reacting. But there was a limit to patience, even for a man who had worn a badge for 20 years. He crouched beside the broken mailbox and touched the jagged edge of the wood. Someone had used a heavy object, maybe a tire iron or a bat. He could almost see the swing, hear the crack. His breathing deepened. The quiet street seemed to hum with invisible tension. Neighbors peeked from their windows but said nothing. Cedar Valley was that kind of place, where smiles were mandatory and silence was survival. Everyone knew Margaret ran the HOA like her personal kingdom. No one dared challenge her authority, at least not openly. Elder took a long breath and looked back at his house, small, neat, with a flag still folded on the porch railing. He had moved here to start over after his divorce, hoping the rhythm of a clean neighborhood might soften the noise inside his mind. Instead, he'd found another kind of battlefield, one of signatures, fines, and whispered threats. He collected the splintered pieces of the mailbox and placed them gently in a cardboard box. Each fragment felt like evidence. He'd been a cop long enough to recognize when something was personal. This wasn't vandalism, it was targeting. When he finished cleaning, he went inside, opened his laptop, and began typing a report. Date, time, incident number 7. He attached photos and sent them to the local police department. Within minutes, his phone rang. "Mr. Reed," said the officer on duty, "we looked into your previous reports. There's no clear evidence linking anyone. These neighborhood disputes, well, they get complicated. Best to settle it through your HOA." Elder almost laughed. The HOA was the problem. He thanked the officer, hung up, and sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked softly on the wall, marking the rhythm of his anger. By afternoon, a white envelope appeared on his doorstep. No stamp, no name, just a typed label. Cedar Valley Homeowners Association, urgent notice. Inside was a formal letter signed by Margaret Halton herself. "Dear Mr. Reed, it has come to our attention that your mailbox, as currently designed, Violates the Community Harmony Guidelines, Section 4A. Please remove or replace it within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in fines of $1,000 per day. We appreciate your cooperation. Below her neat signature, a faint watermark read, Halton Real Estate Group, her private company. Elder stared at the page until the letters blurred. Something inside him hardened. The old cop's instinct whispered that this wasn't just a power trip. There was money, influence, and something darker behind it. He opened a drawer, pulled out a small notebook, and wrote one sentence. War begins today. That night, rain began to fall over Cedar Valley, soft at first, and then pounding against rooftops like marching feet. Elder sat by the window, watching the streetlight flicker across the wet asphalt. Margaret's house glowed faintly across the road, her blinds perfectly straight, her world perfectly controlled. But the balance of control had shifted. Elder wasn't just angry anymore, he was determined. He had fought criminals, liars, and corruption before. Now he was ready to fight again, even if the battlefield was a quiet suburban street. Outside, the wrecked mailbox leaned against the trash bin, water streaming down its sides. Elder whispered under his breath, "You chose the wrong man to push." And for the first time in months, he smiled, not the smile of peace but of purpose. Margaret Halton ruled Cedar Valley like a monarch in pearls. Her power wasn't declared, it was understood. Every trimmed hedge, every matching mailbox, every silent neighbor was a small tribute to her control. She didn't need to shout. Her emails, warnings, and friendly reminders spoke louder than any voice ever could. People described her as refined, devoted to the community. But those who had lived here long enough knew better. Margaret didn't maintain order for the good of Cedar Valley. She maintained it for herself. Perfection to her was a mirror that hid the cracks in her own life. That morning, as she walked her snow-white Maltese, she paused across the street from Elder Reed's house. The man had replaced his destroyed mailbox with a temporary one, plain, metal, functional. It offended her eyes, her lips tightened. "How long?" she murmured, "before he learns?" The dog barked once. She tugged the leash and turned away, but her gaze lingered, hard and calculating. Inside her home, Margaret's office looked more like a command center than a study, lined with polished wood, neatly stacked folders, and HOA files arranged by name. Not address, name. Every resident had a file, notes, warnings, fines, complaints, and Elder Reed's folder sat right on top, thick with recent updates. Margaret opened it, reading his latest email to the police. A cold smile crossed her face. "He really thinks they'll help him," she whispered. Poor man. In her world, the HOA wasn't a civic body. It was leverage. The perfect cover for control. As long as she kept her rules wrapped in legal language and fine print, no one dared to fight back. That afternoon, Elder saw her again. He was sweeping his driveway when Margaret stopped by in her silver Lexus, window rolled halfway down. "Mr. Reed," she said sweetly, "I hope you received my letter." He leaned on his broom. "I did. Interesting definition of harmony you've got there." Margaret chuckled softly. "It's all about maintaining balance. One person's creativity can disrupt the visual rhythm of a neighborhood. You mean people like me don't fit your rhythm," he said. His tone calm but sharp. "Oh, don't be dramatic." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "You're new here. Takes time to understand how Cedar Valley works." "Looks to me like it works for you," Elder replied. A small silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the wind through the trees. Margaret's smile faltered for a heartbeat before returning, flawless again. "Well," she said finally, "I do hope you'll reconsider your construction projects. We wouldn't want another misunderstanding." Then she drove off, her taillights glowing like twin eyes in the dusk. Elder stood still long after she was gone, the broom still in his hand. The conversation had confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't about aesthetics or bylaws. It was about power. That night he took a walk through the quiet neighborhood. Cedar Valley was beautiful under the streetlights. Manicured lawns, identical shutters. Every porch light glowing at the same brightness. It felt unreal. Too perfect, like a movie set. He passed houses where curtains shifted at his approach. Neighbors knew what was happening, yet none of them spoke. Fear kept them obedient. The HOA's reach was deep. A letter from Margaret could ruin a reputation, delay a sale, or drain someone's savings with endless fines. Elder stopped near a cul-de-sac and saw something odd. A for sale sign on a house that hadn't been there last week. Faint tag at the bottom read Halton Real Estate Group. He frowned. Another family gone. Another empty house for Margaret to profit from. It wasn't just about appearances, it was a system. She'd built a kingdom of quiet victims. When Elder returned home, he found an envelope wedged under his front mat. No name, no return address. Inside was a single typed line. "You're not the only one she's done this to." No signature. Just that sentence. He read it twice, then looked around. The street was empty. A chill ran down his spine. Someone was watching. Someone who knew what Margaret had been doing. He slipped the note into his jacket pocket and stepped back inside. At the window, he watched Margaret's house. Lights glowed in her upper office, and he could see her silhouette moving back and forth. Restless, purposeful. She thought she was untouchable. He poured himself another cup of coffee and opened his old police case journal. The notebook smelled faintly of leather and time. On a fresh page, he wrote 3 words: "Find her weakness." Across the street, Margaret sat at her desk with her own cup of tea. Her computer screen displayed a spreadsheet: resident violations, fines, unpaid dues, and upcoming board elections. She moved the cursor over Elder's name and clicked flagged. Her reflection shimmered in the dark window beside her. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, a woman of control. But behind that reflection, something deeper flickered. Fear. She'd built her authority brick by brick, and one man's defiance threatened to pull it all down. She closed the folder, sipped her tea, and whispered, "He won't last long. They never do." But for the first time in years, her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her pen. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering dry leaves across Elder's yard. 2 houses, 2 minds, 1 brewing storm. Cedar Valley slept in silence that night, unaware that the next morning, its queen and her newest enemy would push the neighborhood toward war. For the next few days, Elder Reed spoke to no one. He went about his daily routine like a man on autopilot. Coffee, newspaper, a walk around the block. But behind his calm exterior, his mind was turning like a loaded revolver. Every time, he passed the shattered remains of his old mailbox. Something inside him twisted tighter. The HOA's warning letter sat pinned on his refrigerator door like a trophy of arrogance, signed with Margaret Halton's perfect penmanship. It wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about humiliation, a slow, deliberate breaking of a man's spirit. But Elder had been broken before. He knew how to rebuild. One evening, he parked his truck a few blocks away and took a quiet walk under the fading light. Cedar Valley looked calm from the outside. Rows of perfect houses, identical fences, manicured lawns. But Elder's eyes saw beyond the paint and porch lights. He noticed patterns. Certain homes bore subtle signs, numbers etched in different fonts, bushes trimmed irregularly, or mailboxes slightly off HOA specifications. He jotted notes in his small black notebook. At least 6 homes, all on the far side of the subdivision, had something in common: freshly installed for sale signs with the Halton Real Estate Group logo. He paused at one house, 214 Pinecrest Drive. The front porch light was on, but the curtains were drawn. A woman peeked through the window, caught his gaze, then quickly stepped back. Elder waited. Moments later, the door opened slightly. "You shouldn't be out here after dark," the woman whispered. Her voice trembled. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Elder said softly. "You left a note under my mat?" The woman looked over her shoulder, hesitating. Then she nodded once and opened the door wider. "Come in, quick." Her name was Laura Jennings, a retired paralegal. She'd lived in Cedar Valley for over 20 years. Long enough to watch it change from a friendly community into a tightly controlled system under Margaret's rule. Margaret started small, Laura explained, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her teacup. At first, she fined people for small things: paint colors, garden ornaments. Then came the property inspections, citations, and late fees. Eventually, families couldn't afford to fight. They'd sell their homes to her agency. Elder leaned back, absorbing every word. So she's using the HOA to manipulate property values? Laura nodded. Exactly. She scares people out, buys cheap, sells high. It's all under the radar. I've tried to raise questions, but every time I did, my mailbox was hit too. Her words hit like cold water. The pattern made sense now. The fines, the vandalism, the silence of the neighbors. It was an empire built on fear. Laura stood and pulled out a weathered cardboard box filled with documents, HOA meeting notes, letters, and even recordings. I've kept copies of everything. I just needed someone who wasn't afraid to use them. Elder smiled faintly. You found the right person. By the next morning, the quiet ex-officer had become a quiet investigator. He spent hours cross-checking HOA bylaws, uncovering contradictions, missing signatures, and altered documents. The more he read, the more Margaret's empire began to crack before his eyes. He found that many of her rules, including the one she used against his mailbox, were never approved by the board. They were fabricated, inserted into newsletters, and posted as updates without any official record. It was a web of lies, held together by fear and paperwork. Elder opened his phone and scrolled through old contacts. He stopped on a name, Detective Morrison. They'd served together years ago before Elder retired. He typed a message. Need your advice on a potential HOA fraud case. Quiet for now. We'll update soon? Then, with careful precision, he set up 2 small security cameras, one hidden in the bushes, the other disguised as a light fixture near his porch. If Margaret or her people came again, he'd have proof this time. 2 nights later, the proof arrived. At 2:43 a.m., motion sensors triggered an alert on Elder's phone. He opened the feed. The grainy night vision camera showed a shadowy figure approaching his temporary mailbox. The person moved quickly, bending down, holding something metallic. Then crack! The sound of impact echoed through the night. Elder's jaw tightened. He enhanced the footage, and though the figure wore a hood, the car parked a few feet away gave her away. A silver Lexus. Margaret. She was careful, always careful, but not enough this time. He watched as she looked around, then drove away. He saved the footage in 3 separate encrypted drives and sent a copy to Detective Morrison with one line. War confirmed. The next morning, Elder stood on his porch as a fresh breeze carried the scent of cut grass. For the first time in weeks, he felt clarity. Fear had turned to resolve. He walked to the curb, removed the dented metal mailbox, and threw it into the trash bin. His neighbors watched silently from their windows, curious, cautious. Then he unfolded a blueprint on the hood of his truck. It was a design he'd been sketching for days. A new mailbox, one that wasn't just strong but unbreakable. Titanium base, reinforced steel frame, motion sensors, hidden cameras, and an internal alarm system. This mailbox wouldn't just deliver letters, it would deliver justice. Later that day, Laura joined him in the garage. Are you sure this will work? She asked. Elder smiled, tightening a bolt. If she wants another war, I'll give her one. But this time, I'll be the last man standing. Laura handed him a folder labeled HOA Corruption, Proof. Her eyes softened. Just be careful. Margaret doesn't lose gracefully. Elder looked up, his eyes calm but fierce. She's already lost, he said. She just doesn't know it yet. As dusk fell over Cedar Valley, the rhythmic clang of metal echoed from Elder's garage, the birth cry of a new kind of defiance. Margaret watched from her upstairs window, wine glass in hand, the faint sound of hammering drifting through the still air. Her jaw tightened. Something inside her whispered that this man was different. And for the first time in years, the Queen of Cedar Valley felt afraid. For 2 nights after the second attack, Cedar Valley was silent. No meetings, no letters, no noise, only whispers behind curtains. But Elder Reed knew silence could be louder than gunfire. It meant Margaret Halton was thinking, calculating her next move. and he wasn't planning to wait for it. Laura arrived at Elder's garage before sunrise. She carried a thermos of coffee and a look that mixed fear with determination. "I didn't sleep," she confessed, setting the thermos on the workbench. Elder didn't look up from the titanium frame he was welding. "Good," he said quietly. "Neither did I." When he turned off the torch, his face glistened in the amber light. On the table beside him lay a thick folder. Proof of corruption. Names, dates, emails, altered HOA bylaws, and bank transfers linking Margaret Halton to private accounts in her husband's name. Laura poured 2 cups of coffee, her hands shaking. "I went through the minutes from last year's HOA meeting," she said. 3 board members signed forms they never saw. Their signatures were copied. Elder's eyes hardened. "Forgery. And extortion," Laura added. "She fined them too when they questioned her." He exhaled slowly. The web was bigger than he thought. But the part that caught his attention most wasn't the money. It was a single address scribbled in the margin of a document. 12 Maple Row, HOA storage unit. "That's where she's hiding the originals," Elder murmured. Later that afternoon, Elder met with Detective Morrison in a small diner off Route 19. The detective looked the same as ever. Broad-shouldered, thick mustache, eyes that had seen too much but still cared. Morrison stirred his coffee. "You sure you want to dig this deep, Reed? These HOA people, they've got lawyers sharper than razors." Elder slid a USB drive across the table. "I've got more than lawyers. I've got truth, and video proof she vandalized my property herself." Morrison plugged the drive into his laptop. His brows furrowed as the footage played. "Hell," he muttered. "She's bold." "Or desperate," Elder said. "Either way, I'm not letting this end quietly." Morrison closed the laptop, his tone turning serious. "I'll keep this off the record for now. If you're right, she's not just abusing power, she's running organized fraud." They shook hands. For the first time, Elder had an ally who could fight from the inside. Meanwhile, Margaret Halton sat at the head of a long mahogany table during an emergency HOA meeting. Around her were 5 board members, all older, all nervous. She smiled politely, but her tone sliced through the room like ice. "It seems Mr. Reed is spreading rumors," she said. "He's telling people we falsify records. I expect cooperation to handle this disturbance." A man at the end of the table cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should talk to him." Margaret slammed her hand against the table. "Talk?" Her voice echoed. "You think this is a debate? Cedar Valley thrives because I enforce order. If we lose that, this place becomes chaos." The room fell silent. She straightened, smoothing her blazer. "Send violation notices to every property near Reed's. Let them know what happens when they side with troublemakers." The board nodded reluctantly. None dared to refuse. Margaret smiled again, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. That night, clouds hung low over Cedar Valley. Elder drove past Maple Row at 2 a.m., headlights off. The storage facility was quiet, surrounded by chain-link fencing. He parked a block away, slipping through the side gate with practiced ease. Years of service had made him careful, invisible when he needed to be. Inside the storage unit, his flashlight flickered across rows of file boxes, HOA financial records, violation logs, property transfers. Everything Margaret had tried to hide was here. He took photos, scanning documents into a small portable device. Then his beam froze on one folder labeled Confidential, Halton Private. Inside were signed real estate deals showing she'd bought at least 12 properties under shell names, later resold through her company for triple value. She'd been running a real estate monopoly disguised as a neighborhood association. As he closed the folder, a faint sound outside made him stop. Tires on gravel. Someone else was there. Elder killed his light and crouched behind a row of boxes. Through the narrow window, he saw the silver Lexus pull up. Margaret. She stepped out, phone to her ear. "Yes, I told you to lock down everything. Someone's leaking files. If Reed gets anything out, we're finished." Her voice faded as she entered the next unit over. Elder slipped out quietly, heart steady, camera full. He had what he needed. Back home, Elder connected his scanner to the laptop. Files filled the screen, proof of forgery, extortion, and racketeering. He created an encrypted folder labeled Cedar Valley Truth, uploaded it to a private server, and sent a copy to Morrison with a short message. Evidence secured. Wait for the signal? Laura watched from the doorway, anxious. If she finds out you were there, she will, Elder said calmly. But by the time she does, it'll be too late. He closed the laptop and leaned back. For the first time, he smiled. Not with victory, but with quiet satisfaction. At dawn, Margaret's silver Lexus rolled to a stop in front of Elder's house. She stepped out, flanked by 2 HOA officers carrying clipboards. Mr. Reed, she called sharply. You're in violation again. Unregistered surveillance equipment, unsanctioned structural modification, and... Elder interrupted her with a small remote in his hand. He pressed a button. Behind him, the new titanium mailbox opened, revealing a built-in camera screen. Margaret's image, from last night's break-in, played in full color for the entire street to see. Gasps echoed from the neighbors' porches. Margaret's face turned pale. Violation, Elder said softly. You mean this kind? Margaret took a step back, fury mixing with panic. For the first time, she had no words. As she turned and stormed away, Elder looked up at the gathering neighbors, people who had been silent for too long. Cedar Valley doesn't belong to fear, he said quietly. Not anymore, Laura stood beside him, her eyes shining with relief and disbelief. And as the sun rose over the manicured lawns and perfect fences, the first real cracks appeared in Margaret Halton's empire. The war had just turned. Rain fell in slow, heavy drops across Cedar Valley that morning, turning the streets into mirrors and the lawns into silver sheets. Elder Reed stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the world that had finally started to wake up. Neighbors waved now, smiled even, small gestures of courage born from last night's revelation. But Elder knew that peace after exposure was only a pause before retaliation. By mid-afternoon, he got his answer. A black SUV pulled into his driveway, engine humming like a threat. 2 men in suits stepped out, both wearing dark glasses despite the overcast sky. One held a thick envelope. Mr. Reed, the taller man asked. Yes. You've been served. Elder took the envelope, reading the top line, Halton v. Reed, civil defamation and harassment suit. He almost laughed. Margaret wasn't backing down. She was escalating the war. He thanked the men politely and closed the door, feeling the old pulse of battle steady in his chest. He opened the envelope at his kitchen table. The papers accused him of fabricating evidence, stalking an HOA official, and installing illegal surveillance equipment. The irony almost made him smile. But there was one line that chilled him. Restraining order filed pending investigation. She was trying to silence him completely. Laura came over minutes later carrying her laptop and a worried expression. I heard, she said. Half the neighborhood's talking about it already. She's spinning it. Says you threatened her life. Elder looked out the window. She's losing control. People like her only know power when they're feared. Laura bit her lip. She's dangerous when cornered. I've fought worse, he said, quietly but not arrogantly. That evening his phone buzzed. A message from Detective Morrison. Got your files. FBI's interested. Stay put tonight. Elder read it twice. The FBI. It was bigger than he imagined. If federal agents were involved, Margaret's crimes had reached beyond neighborhood lines, maybe across county or state. But he didn't get the chance to rest. At midnight, Ty retreated outside. Floodlights flashed through his windows. Elder grabbed his jacket and stepped onto the porch. Construction vehicles, bulldozers, dump trucks, and men in reflective vests crowded his front yard. Margaret stood in the rain, umbrella in hand, holding a clipboard like a weapon. This property is under emergency demolition, she shouted over the noise. Violation of safety codes. Elder's voice cut through the chaos. You forged those orders, Margaret. I checked the county permits, she smiled. A cold, trembling smile. Then sue me. Laura ran out from her house, screaming for them to stop, but one of the men had already started the bulldozer. Its engine roared, inching toward the mailbox. Elder stepped in front of it, hands raised. The driver hesitated, unsure. Move, Margaret ordered. That man is trespassing on HOA property. Before the bulldozer could lurch forward again, Red and blue lights flashed across the street. Sirens wailed. A black federal SUV slid to a stop, and Detective Morrison stepped out with 2 federal agents in raincoats. "Shut everything down," Morrison yelled. "All vehicles off the property." The workers froze. Margaret turned pale. "You can't," she began, but Morrison was already holding up a document. Federal warrant for the seizure of HOA financial records and property. Margaret Halton, you're under investigation for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The sound of rain filled the silence that followed. One of the agents stepped forward, reading Margaret her rights. She tried to argue, but her words drowned beneath the steady drum of the storm. Elder watched quietly as they cuffed her hands. Her umbrella fell, rolling across the driveway like a final symbol of authority lost. For the first time, she looked small, not the queen of the subdivision, but a frightened woman who'd built her empire on deceit. Neighbors gathered in clusters under their porches, whispering, recording on their phones. Laura stood beside Elder, her hand trembling on his arm. "It's over," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. But it's ending." Margaret was escorted to the waiting car, passing the mailbox that still stood untouched. She paused, eyes narrowing. "You think you won?" she hissed. "They'll replace me. There's always another me." Elder met her gaze calmly. "Then I'll be here for them too." The car door shut and the convoy rolled away. Rain softened to drizzle, and the sound of engines faded into the distance. Hours later, as dawn broke, Morrison returned with updates. "They found her accounts," he said. "Fake corporations, real estate kickbacks, offshore transfers. She'll face charges in multiple states." "You did good, Reed." Elder nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "I didn't do it alone. Laura, the neighbors, they found their voice again." Morrison smiled faintly. "You gave them a reason to." When the detective left, Elder stood in front of his titanium mailbox. The morning sun reflected off its polished surface, golden and solid, a monument to every sleepless night, every insult, every fight he refused to lose. Laura joined him, handing him a small envelope. "We're starting something new," she said. "The Cedar Valley Homeowners Reform Group. People want you to lead it." Elder smiled faintly. "I'm done leading battles." "Not a battle," she said softly. "A rebuilding." He looked around at the neighborhood, once suffocating with fear, now alive with cautious hope. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't in years: belonging. As the light spread across the lawns, Elder reached out and touched the mailbox. It was cold, but alive with memory. What began as a symbol of defiance had become something far greater. Proof that even in the smallest wars, justice could still find a way to win. And as Cedar Valley woke to its first day of freedom, Elder Reed closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "It's finally over." But somewhere deep inside, he knew, peace like mail always came with another delivery waiting. Night fell soft and golden over Cedar Valley, but the air still hummed with the echoes of what had happened. The streets that once feared Margaret Halton's shadow now glowed with porch lights and cautious laughter. It had been 2 weeks since her arrest, and the neighborhood was learning to breathe again. Yet Elder Reed didn't trust the peace that came too easily. He knew quite often hid something unfinished. He sat on his porch that evening, the titanium mailbox beside him like a loyal soldier after war. Across the street, children played with chalk on the pavement, where police cars once stood. Laura walked over with a stack of printed pages and a hopeful smile. "They voted," she said, setting the papers on his lap. "The HOA board is dissolved. The residents want to form a new one, transparent, elected properly this time, and they want you as interim chair." Elder leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I spent half my life taking orders and the other half fighting them. Not sure I'm ready to start giving them." Laura's tone softened. "It's not about control, Elder, it's about protection. People trust you. They saw you stand your ground when no one else dared." He nodded slowly, eyes drifting toward the horizon where storm clouds gathered. "Trust," he murmured. "That's a word I haven't heard in years." A long silence followed, broken only by the faint chirp of cicadas. Then Elder opened one of the folders Laura had brought. Minutes from their last emergency meeting, signatures from every homeowner, and a petition to rename their community, Cedar Valley United. He looked up at her, surprised. "You did this?" She shrugged lightly. "No, we all did." For the first time he felt something beyond relief, pride. Real heavy pride. Not for himself, but for a community that had decided to fight back. Not with weapons, but with unity. But just as that warmth settled in, the night shifted. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A deep, calm voice spoke. "Mr. Reed, this is Agent Wyatt from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We've processed the Halton case. She's agreed to cooperate, and her statements mention someone named Reed." Elder's grip tightened around the phone. "She's lying. I believe you," Wyatt replied. "But her information led us to something bigger. She wasn't working alone," the agent's voice lowered. "There's a group, a network of HOAs across 3 states. Fraud, intimidation, property theft, shell corporations. Cedar Valley was just one of many." Elder sat forward, the old instinct of a soldier returning. "And you think she was reporting to someone higher?" "We know she was," Wyatt confirmed. "But we don't have proof yet. We'll need your help again, Mr. Reed. This time, not just as a victim, but as bait." The line went silent. Elder closed the phone slowly, his pulse steady but cold. The war wasn't over. It had only expanded. Laura noticed his expression change. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Just an old ghost calling." That night, as rain began to fall again, Elder opened his garage and stared at the wall where the first mailbox design still hung, burned, torn, and taped together like a relic. Below it, the new titanium mailbox gleamed under a single bulb. A symbol of defiance, yes, but also of responsibility. He poured himself a cup of coffee and turned on the small TV in the corner. The news was reporting Margaret's first court appearance. Her face pale, her once perfect hair disheveled. She was pleading guilty to multiple charges in exchange for leniency. The reporter mentioned something that caught his attention. A co-defendant, identity sealed under federal order. Elder muttered under his breath, "There it is." The next day, Morrison stopped by with his usual half-smile and a paper bag of donuts. "You're officially a local legend," he said. "There's talk about writing an article. Veteran brings down corrupt HOA. Might even get you a medal from the state housing department." Elder chuckled. "They can keep the medal. Just give me peace," Morrison nodded. "About that, the feds might need you to testify again." "The network Halton was part of? They've got ties in 2 neighboring towns. She's naming people." "Of course she is," Elder said. "Queen Falls, she drags the whole court with her." Later that afternoon, Elder walked neighborhood, greeting residents who waved with genuine warmth now. Ruth, the retired paralegal, handed him a small box wrapped in brown paper. "It's from neighbors," she said. "Open it." Inside was a miniature replica of his indestructible mailbox, carved from wood and engraved with a single word: resilience. He didn't say much, just nodded and smiled, eyes misting. Sometimes gratitude said more than any speech could. By evening, the streets glowed again with porch lights. Laughter came easy, and children drew hearts and flags on the sidewalk. The new community board had its first informal meeting in Laura's backyard. No formalities, no rigid rules, just people talking, sharing, healing. Elder sat quietly at the edge, watching them plan charity events, neighborhood cleanups, and scholarships for veterans' families. What started as a war had turned into a kind of peace he hadn't believed was possible. Still, in the quiet moments, his thoughts drifted to Margaret sitting in her cold federal cell, whispering names to save herself. Somewhere out there, her partners, the real architects, were watching, waiting. When he returned home that night, the wind had picked up again. The mailbox stood firm, raindrops sliding down its steel face. He placed his hand on it, feeling its cold strength. "This isn't over yet," he murmured. "But at least now I'm not fighting alone." He turned off the porch light and went inside, unaware that a dark sedan had just stopped at the far end of the street. Its engine idled for a few seconds before slipping quietly away into the night. Inside the car, a man in a black coat made a note on a clipboard. Subject: Elder Reed, still active, awaiting next order. And just like that, Cedar Valley's brief peace trembled once again. Fragile, temporary, and waiting for the next storm. The storm that rolled into Cedar Valley that night was the kind of storm that erased borders between sky and earth. Thunder shaking rooftops, lightning clawing at the clouds. Elder Reed watched it from his window. that familiar ache of vigilance stirring in his chest. He had seen storms like this before, on battlefields, in foreign deserts, in cities torn by greed, and somehow they all felt the same before the end. The headlights returned just past midnight. The same dark sedan from the night before glided slowly down the street, tires slicing through puddles. Elder didn't move. He simply watched. A figure stepped out, tall, suited, holding an umbrella. The man didn't look like a criminal. He looked like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. He walked up the driveway and stopped before the titanium mailbox, rain dripping from his coat. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice deep and polite, "you've caused quite a bit of trouble." Elder opened the front door, not frightened but steady. "That mailbox caused the trouble," he replied. "I just built it." The man smiled faintly. "You exposed something that wasn't meant to be seen. Margaret Halton was a small piece of a large machine. You've made people nervous, powerful people." Elder crossed his arms. "Then maybe they should be nervous." Lightning split the sky behind them, illuminating the stranger's face for a moment. Calm, confident, but cold. "You've got files," the man said. "We want them. Turn them over and you walk away untouched. Keep them, and I can't promise what happens next." Elder's eyes flicked toward the mailbox where a small red light blinked, recording, transmitting, saving every word. He gave a small smile. "You should know," he said quietly. "I don't negotiate with threats. Learned that a long time ago." The stranger sighed softly. "Then you'll learn the hard way." He turned to leave. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The sedan vanished into the rain as quietly as it came, leaving only a few remarks marks and tension behind. Elder didn't sleep that night. He made coffee at dawn, loaded the data drives, the documents, and the encrypted backups into a weatherproof box. He called Detective Morrison, who answered groggily. "It's starting again," Elder said. "They came for the files. Stay inside," Morrison replied. "We'll send protection." By the time the police arrived, Elder was gone. He drove east along the coastal road, the steel-gray ocean on one side, forest on the other. His destination wasn't escape, it was exposure. The files he carried didn't just prove Margaret's crimes. They linked developers, attorneys, and property investors to a nationwide scheme, the National Homeowners Alliance, a front for laundering millions through fake HOA fines and property foreclosures. He reached a small press office in Seaside Bluff, where Morrison had arranged to meet him. But when Elder pulled up, the parking lot was empty except for a white van. His instincts screamed at him. He stepped out carefully, hand near his phone. The van door slid open, and there stood Laura, raincoat-soaked, hair sticking to her face. "Elder," she called out, running toward him. They intercepted Morrison. He's been taken off the case. Before he could answer, headlights flared across the lot. 3 black SUVs fanning out, blocking every exit. Elder's pulse steadied, not in fear, but in focus. He handed Laura the waterproof case. "If they get me," he said, "you take this to the press. Straight to them. No stops." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You can't face them alone." He smiled softly. "I'm not alone. Not anymore." The first SUV door opened. The same man from the night before stepped out, flanked by 2 guards. "You should have taken the deal," he said. Elder stepped forward, rain pouring down, thunder roaring above. "You think people like you can silence everyone forever? You can't bury truth with paperwork." The man raised his hand. "Take him." Before the guards could move, sirens blazed from the far end of the lot. Unmarked federal vehicles screeching to a halt. Agents poured out, weapons drawn. Morrison stepped out of the lead car, soaking wet but smiling fiercely. "FBI!" he shouted. "Hands where I can see them." The suited man froze, eyes narrowing. "You're too late," he hissed. Morrison's voice thundered back. "You underestimated the mailbox. It's been transmitting live feeds since last night. Every word, every threat, all recorded." The man turned toward Elder, realization dawning. The red light on the small pin camera at Elder's collar blinked steadily. Within seconds, the agents surrounded them. The black-suited stranger was handcuffed, his calm cracking as he muttered curses under his breath. Elder exhaled slowly. The storm began to break, rain thinning to mist. Laura clutched the case to her chest, trembling with relief. "It's over," Morrison said, clapping Elder on the shoulder. Elder looked out toward the ocean. No, he said softly. It's just been exposed. Weeks later. The story made national headlines. Veteran exposes nationwide HOA fraud ring. Margaret Halton testified under protection, revealing names that shook city councils and corporate boards. Dozens of arrests followed. Cedar Valley became a symbol of resilience. The new community organization thrived. Honest, united, hopeful. The residents erected a small monument at the entrance of the subdivision. A steel sculpture shaped like a mailbox, engraved with the words, "Truth Delivers." Laura was elected the first president of the new Homeowners Council. Morrison visited often, sometimes just for coffee. Sometimes to make sure Elder was still doing all right. As for Elder Reed, he spent his mornings in peace tending his small garden, watching the sunrise reflect off the metal mailbox that had started it all. Sometimes kids would pass by and ask him, "Mr. Reed, is it true your mailbox stopped bad guys?" He'd smile gently and say, "Not the mailbox, kid. The people behind it." When the nights grew quiet, he would sit with his coffee and think about the strange war that began with a simple act of vandalism. A war that uncovered greed, corruption, and the hidden price of silence. He had built a mailbox to survive destruction. Instead, he had built a legacy. And as the wind rustled through Cedar Valley, carrying the faint laughter of neighbors and the scent of rain on steel, Elder whispered his final words, "Justice delivered." Message received.